In week one, the Falcons don't have to be scared of T.J. Watt, but they might be a little worried about Keeanu Benton.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And of course, I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me each and every day. Shout out to the everydayers who make this podcast their first listen or first watch each and every day. And to become an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is all about key matchups, intriguing matchups that I specifically am most intrigued by, have my eyes on, including how the Steelers, are going to deal with the Falcons' two biggest weapons in the passing game in Kyle Pitts and Drake London. But of course, it's really all about the trenches, where the Steelers have potentially, arguably, the best 5-man front in the entire NFL, where going from left to right, from the offense's perspective, you have Alex Highsmith, Cam Heyward, Keeanu Benton, Larry Ogunjobi, and T.J. Watt. That's as good a 5-man unit as any team in the league has. But the thing about that 5-man unit, as I just mentioned, you kind of know where those guys are going to line up. It's pretty predictable, right? Those guys pretty much line up on the same side. Over the last 5 years, 97% of TJ Watt's pass rushing snaps have come from the left side of the defense or the right side of the offensive line. And you can look at similar high percentages, 95% for Alex Highsmith and Cam Heyward and Larry Ogunjobi in recent years, which means that it makes it easier for a team like the Falcons to double and chip TJ Watt because they know what side of the field he's going to be on, right? And that side is going to be going up against Kaleb McGary. And we know Kaleb McGary, biggest struggle as a right tackle is dealing with speed. And of course, TJ Watt's greatest strength as a pass rusher is his speed rush, but you can somewhat mitigate that with chip help by lining up a slot receiver, a tight end on that side of the field that's going to prevent TJ Watt from teeing off with his speed. The Rams did this consistently in their Week 7 matchup against the Steelers last year. Outside of a handful of snaps where TJ Watt flipped sides, they were able to chip TJ Watt on almost every single snap, and it led to Watt having his least productive game as a pass rusher last year, only 2 pressures, his lowest of the season. Now, Watt still managed to make game-changing plays even when he wasn't teeing off on the quarterback because he had a critical interception. That was a big reason why the Steelers won that game in that week. It's the whole, you can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. But I do think the Falcons have the ability to contain TJ Watt because of the predictability of where he's going to line up on any given side of the field. And that chip help that's going to come, that's going to help contain him and neutralize him for the most part and prevent him from being that game-changing player. Now, that's the upside. I think the upside is you can contain TJ Watt. The downside of that, though, is that it's going to leave everybody else susceptible on your offensive line in that Steelers defensive front to have one-on-ones. And they're going to be stuck on an island, and they're not going to be able to get the help that they may need in order to win those situations. And so you have to have complete trust in the other 4 guys, the other 4 blockers, to be able to hold up their own. And I think 3 of those matchups you're particularly concerned of. You're not as concerned about Chris Lindstrom going up against Larry Ogunjobi. Ogunjobi's a good player, but I don't think he's the type of pass rusher that should give Chris Lindstrom too many problems in this game. But the other 3 guys, you do have some concerns. Alex Highsmith against Jake Matthews, Cam Heyward against Matthew Bergeron, and Keeanu Benton against Drew Dalman. Now, Jake is used to not having help. He's basically been on an island for like 8 years, right? But I think that island is going to get challenged with a tropical storm by the name of Alex Highsmith, right? That when I think about Jake and the types of pass rushers that have given Jake the most problems over his career, it's been power rushers, bull rushers. But I've also seen him be a little bit more susceptible to a spin move. I can remember Joe Tryon beating him a couple of years ago and Aiden Hutchinson beating him last year with a couple of those spin moves, right? And Highsmith has a very good spin move. And he also has more than enough power to give Jake Matthews problems, right? According to James Foster of A to Z Sports and No Flags Film on Twitter, Highsmith was, I believe, top 5 in terms of the number of pressures among edge rushers last year, in terms of wins with a bull rush last year. And so that's the type of combination that could give Jake some problems in this game. And then you look at the type of rushers that give Matthew Bergeron problems. He struggled mightily last year against power physical D tackles, and that's what Cameron Heyward specializes in. Now, I think Cam Heyward is not the player he was a couple of years ago when he was still one of the best D tackles in the league, but I still think he has more than enough power that if he's just going to go right through Matthew Bergeron's face, he could give him a lot of problems in this game. And then Dalman is another guy, since he's smaller, can be susceptible to power. But I think the thing that Keeanu Benton, who's going to be the nose tackle, that's going to line up and get those one-on-ones against Drew Dalman at time, Benton can win in a variety of ways. I've seen him win with spins and clubs and swims, power, etc. Right? He was very dominant this preseason. A lot of people are expecting Keeanu Benton to make a big jump this year and kind of take over that mantle from Cam Heyward as the most formidable interior rusher on that Steelers front. And you can also count me among one of those people that believes that that is going to be the case by the end of this season. And sort of Benton has an opportunity to have the coming out party this week in week 1 against the Falcons and Drew Dalman. And so to me, those two matchups, Bergeron versus Heyward, Dalman versus Benton, are the two that I'm most concerned with, especially given that Kirk Cousins is a pocket quarterback and that interior pressure can give him particularly a lot of problems, prevent him from stepping up in the pocket. And he doesn't have the mobility to extend plays outside the pocket in the ways that other quarterbacks could with that interior pressure. And so that could create a lot of problems. So I expect the Falcons to win this game, but if they don't, it could very easily be boiled down to because the interior offensive line does not hold up. Right. And that to me is the biggest red flag with Kirk Cousins, right? Moving forward, that if we're thinking, we're expecting it to work out with Kirk, but if it doesn't work out, to me, that lack of mobility is going to be the biggest problem, where those second reaction play, those off structure plays that other offenses are able to get from their quarterbacks, the Falcons are not going to be able to get from Kirk Cousins due to that lack of mobility. And while we expect Kirk to be well-versed in this offense, very familiar with this offense from his days working under Kevin O'Connell and Sean McVay and Gary Kubiak, et cetera, right? Just because he's familiar with this offense does not mean he's mastered this offense. And especially early in the season, that lack of mastery, right, could lead to some hesitation on some of these plays where he's not necessarily seeing the field or reading it as correctly as he should when he masters this offense, which I'm personally expecting is more of a 2025 thing when we can expect mastery of this offense with Kirk Cousins. But if we get that sort of hesitation, that could be a problem, especially if the blocking isn't there. If he's holding on to the ball for a beat too long and the offensive line is getting annihilated, that could be the problem. That's where my concern, if we're sitting here, 6 months from now being like, man, that Kirk Cousins move did not work out in the way that we thought it was, to me, it's going to be because the offensive line didn't hold up their end of the bargain and protect Kirk in the ways that they needed Kirk. So this offensive line has been billed as one of the best in the NFL. And they'll get every opportunity in these first couple of games of the season, starting in week 1 against the Steelers, to prove if they are the best in the NFL. And so we'll see how they win. I'm expecting Highsmith to get his fair share of wins against Jake, but I'm not expecting him to take over the game. The two guys that I'm most concerned that have the potential to take over the game, just because I think they're going up against the most vulnerable part of the Falcons offensive line, is going to be Cam Heyward and Keeanu Benton. And so I'm not particularly worried about T.J. Watt taking over this game. I'm sure he'll get his, but I don't expect him to dominate this game in the ways that we've seen T.J. Watt dominate other games throughout because of the predictability in the Steelers game plan. Now, the Steelers could throw a wrench into that game plan by deciding for basically the first time in like 15 years that, hey, we're not going to play that style away, and we're going to move T.J. Watt around and try to get him matched up against the most advantageous situation and move him away from the help that is inevitably going to come. The Steelers could do that, right? That's how most teams use their elite pass rushers. That's how Myles Garrett is used and Micah Parsons and et cetera are used and whatnot. And Steelers don't really do that. They haven't really done that really ever in the Tomlin era. So I'm not expecting that to start now, but theoretically it could. They could decide, you know what are we like? Year 16 of Mike Tomlin or whatever we are. It's like, you know what? Let's try some new things. So there's a non-zero chance that the Steelers could throw a wrench into this entire game plan by basically, moving T.J. Watt around. I don't think that number is much higher than 0, but it's a non-zero chance that they could decide, finally Mike Tomlin's like, hey, I'm feeling frisky. Let's move TJ Watt around. So that could definitely completely obliterate everything I've just said. And we should be worried about TJ Watt in that situation, but I'm not expecting that to happen just because, we've had, 15 years of them doing it a certain way. It's generally worked for them because they've had consistently one of the best defenses, in the NFL during that time. So I'm not expecting that to change, but we'll see on that. So overall, I think the offensive line has a lot to prove on Sunday. If they hold up, they give Kirk time, I feel like this Falcons offense will be able to attack a vulnerable Steelers secondary or back seven, if you will. And one of the ways that they'll be able to do that with a lot of sort of in-breaking routes, crossing routes, Drake London being utilized a lot like Puka Nacua was against the Steelers last year, and Puka Nacua thrived in that game. And to me, the next intriguing matchup is whether or not Drake London is going to thrive going up against Joey Porter Jr., and that's another matchup that we'll break down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, let's talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with that YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. And while you're there, guys, go check out the line for the upcoming Week 1 Falcons Steelers action. The Falcons are currently favored by 3 points. Will that line move over the course of this week? Maybe, who knows? But, to go take advantage of that action and, go take advantage of the line for Georgia to win the national title or whatever you're into, the Braves to make this title run or whatever you think is going to happen. It's all available at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So we discussed this all off season long that Drake London is expected to play the Puka Nacua role in this Rams offense or this derivative of the Rams offense here in Atlanta. That's that Z wide receiver. You're going to see a lot of in-breaking routes, a lot of crossers, and that's going to be something that plays to the strength of Kirk Cousins, who's been one of the best in the NFL and was the best in the NFL last year specifically, and I'm sure like top 3 probably the previous year in terms of throwing over the middle and throwing those in-breaking routes based off of certain metrics. And it's led us to have high expectations for Drake London this year, right? Later this week, possibly tomorrow, I'll be coming out with my official stat projections for the upcoming Falcons season, as well as my official win-loss record prediction for the upcoming season. But right now, I'm projecting somewhere around 100 catches for Drake London, somewhere north of 1,200 yards for Drake London, maybe pushing 1,300 yards this upcoming season. So it's poised to be a big year for Drake London, but it's also poised to be a big year for Locked On NFL, guys, because the new Locked On NFL is here with 2 shows each and every day. You got Madman Tyler Rowland kicking off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop for Tony Riggins for some real NFL talk, detailed breakdowns in under 30 minutes, hot opinions, NFL insight, local expertise. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Download Locked On NFL as your second listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So continuing the conversation about, Puka Nacua, and Drake London filling that shoes, it's a good look because Puka Nacua cooked the Steelers last year. He had 8 catches on 12 targets for 154 yards in that Week 7 matchup last year, but very few of those catches came against Joey Porter Jr. In fact, they were matched up about 4 times in that game where Nacua was targeted with Porter as the primary in coverage, and he only gave up 1 catch for 22 yards, and that one was basically him in zone coverage where he was playing off of him, and Nacua beat him on an in-breaker. Basically a dig route against cover 3, I think. And, the other 3 times they were matched up, which was effectively man or match coverage, Porter basically locked him down. And that basically tells you that Nacua was killing Levi Wallace and the rest of the Steelers secondary. And to me, because of that information, I'm very curious to see how the Steelers decide to deploy Porter, because typically, similar to what they do with their fronts, they typically lined up, especially in the first half of last year's, 94% through the first 8 games of the season, and that included the Rams game, through the first 8 weeks of the season, 94% of Joey Porter's snaps as a outside corner came lined up on the left side of the defense, right? But then starting in week 9, 2 weeks after that Rams game, only about 64% of his snaps came lined up on the left. So they started moving him around much, much more. And so if I'm the Steelers and I'm thinking about this matchup, I'm potentially going to ask Porter to follow Drake London around the formation, assuming that Drake London, is deployed on multiple sides of the field. Like if I'm the Falcons and the Falcons decide to put Porter on the left side, then I'm going to line up Drake London as much as possible on the opposite side. So the left side of the offense, the right side of the Steelers defense, while Porter's on the left side of the Steelers defense, the right side of the Falcons offense. That's how I would do it. Now, we could theoretically, the Steelers could play that sort of static look because they've upgraded theoretically their number 2 cornerback with Dante Jackson over Levi Wallace. And I think Jackson has generally fared well against the Falcons receivers over the years in his many years playing for Carolina. I can't really recall any games over the last, 10 or not 10 years, 10 times we played Carolina because Jackson's been there for a while that I remember oh man, Dante Jackson's really struggling today. Even going back to the days when Julio and Ridley were there. But so I think the Steelers can get away with that and just kind of play it by ear, potentially by if somebody's struggling in particular, then they can maybe move Joey Porter in game as a mid-game adjustment or something like that. But the Rams were able to exploit the Steelers quite a bit despite Porter's individual success with a lot of explosive plays in the passing. I think they had 7 explosive plays in that game last year. A lot of those were crossing routes, in breakers, the types of things that we're expecting to see a lot of that. And I expect the Falcons to repeat that success, use a lot of play action, try to isolate those linebackers, get them sucked up, and then attack over their heads. The Steelers linebackers are not the greatest in coverage. Elandon Roberts is basically their version of Nate Landman, not the world's greatest coverage guy. Patrick Queen is better in coverage, but he's never been a elite coverage guy that I think many people thought he would be coming out of LSU as that first round pick several years ago. He's competent in coverage and certainly an upgrade over Roberts and probably an upgrade of what the Steelers have had for the most part at that other spot, since, however long it's been since Ryan Shazier was part of that unit. So he's an upgrade there, but I still think they're going to be very vulnerable to a lot of those crossing routes with that play action passing game. And, besides the linebacker position, if I'm the Steelers, the other area of concern that's going to affect the middle of the field is that nickel cornerback spot where Cam Sutton's suspended for the first 8 games of the season. And presumably his replacement, from what I understand, is going to be an undrafted free agent by the name of Beanie Bishop coming out of West Virginia. And if I'm the Falcons, I'm gonna test Beanie Bishop, and we're gonna find out, this is gonna be your welcome to the NFL game. And so, getting whoever's gonna line up in the slot against Beanie Bishop as much as possible, spamming that matchup early and often to sort of see how he holds up, I think will be an important part of the Falcons game plan. Now, is Ray McCloud the solution to that problem? Again, I think we'll see plenty of Ray on week 1, but if I'm the Falcons, I'm going to try to get London and Pitts as much as possible in that slot role going up against Bishop, where I can get my best or my second best going up against potentially their worst defensive player. And that the same goes for Elandon Roberts and whatnot. I'm going to try to isolate those 2 guys and really go after them if I'm the Falcons. And so, this is one of the reasons why, I don't have as much expectations that the Falcons going to play a lot of 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets, because I just have a hard time buying that the Falcons are going to ask Ray McCloud, their current number 3 wide receiver, to play 60-70% of the snaps, which is what you would normally ask if you're going to play that number 3 wide receiver in a lot of 11 personnel. And I think the Falcons are going to use a lot more 12 personnel, which is 2 tight end sets, than a lot of people are expecting, assuming that they're just going to take from the Rams and just live in 11 personnel, as the Rams have done pretty consistently in the McVay era, outside of 2 seasons where, they were over 90% 11 personnel. And I expect that to start on Sunday against the Steelers, where we're going to see a lot more 12 personnel, where Kyle Pitts is basically acting as that de facto slot receiver. And then you're going to have Charlie Warner working as that inline tight end. And that's going to contribute to him chipping T.J. Watt in a lot of those plays lined up in that situation. So this could be a big week for the unicorn in Kyle Pitts. And we'll break down how big a week it could be as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, we're trying to get back into the stadium, and Game Time is helping us by taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. And what Game Time is doing is they have shop your flash deals, which are exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game. You don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. And We all love those panoramic seat views, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. And whether you're into football, baseball, other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Game Time is taking the guesswork out of buying those tickets. And all you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And guys, today's episode is also sponsored by BetterHelp. And what's something that you guys have loved to learn as an adult? Do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that something that you lost in childhood? And therapy can help you reconnect with that sense of wonder, because your back to school era can come at any age. Therapy has taught me positive coping skills, like you can control what you can control. And I use those skills every single Sunday when I watch the Atlanta Falcons, and it helps empower me to be the best version of myself. And therapy isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp by visiting BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So if you've been listening to this podcast as an everyday or since March, you've heard my two biggest expectations for how Kyle Pitts' usage is going to change in the Zach Robinson offense. The first one is that we're going to see him get a lot more underneath targets rather than being that vertical threat that he has been in Arthur Smith's offense. And I also think you're going to see an increase in the amount of inline snaps that Kyle Pitts is going to have. But that doesn't mean that he's going to be exclusively inline. I'm expecting that number to be maybe 40-45% of his snaps as an inline tight end, which is significantly higher than the 30% that he has been in line throughout his NFL career, and 22% last year in particular. So we'll probably see double the amount of inline snaps for Kyle Pitts this year compared to last year, but that still means about 50-60% of his snaps he's still going to be flexed out as a slot receiver or as a out wide and whatnot. And, as a reminder, I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but I think how defenses deal specifically with Kyle Pitts, especially when the Falcons are using that 12 personnel looks, is going to be a critical component of how Zach Robinson deploys his offensive scheme this year. In general, defenses, when they're presented with two tight ends or 12 personnel, they like to match with base defense, right? That means you're going to have a linebacker or a safety on that tight end, right? And you can understand, though, if defenses decide against deploying that way, because Kyle Pitts is not your typical tight end, right? He's that unicorn. And instead, they're going to try to match him up with a nickel cornerback, because that's going to give him a much more advantageous look in pass coverage than putting a linebacker on Pitts, right? Pitts is too fast for a linebacker, too big for a safety, or at least most safeties in the NFL. And so that's going to be a matchup advantage that the Falcons can exploit. And so depending on how defenses defend Kyle Pitts in those situations, I think it's going to be critical, because in the situation where teams play base, right, basically the Falcons are going to zig or zag depending on how the defenses play it, right? If teams play base against the Falcons 12 personnel looks, and they're going to put that safety or linebacker on Kyle Pitts, then I expect the Falcons to go and spam that play action passing attack and be like, hey, we got a mismatch, we're going to get Pitts one-on-one with an inferior coverage player, and so that we're going to lean more towards our passing game in those specific instances. And if defenses are playing nickel against that, then I expect the Falcons to lean on their running game in those situations, use Pitts' size to create mismatches as a blocker. You look at Beanie Bishop, who's 5'9", 180 pounds. You can imagine someone like Kyle Pitts, who's 6'6", 240 or whatever he is at this point in time, should theoretically win as a blocker in those instances, having, up to 60 pounds of mass on a player like Beanie Bishop. And so that's one of the things I think is very underrated about the role of the slot receiver in this, McVay derivative offense under Zach Robinson, which is the blocking ability, right? I think that's the main reason why Ray McLeod, won that spot over Rondell Moore going into training camp. And you've heard Zach Robinson at every instance where he's been asked about Kyle Pitts since coming on to Atlanta back in January. He's praised Kyle Pitts' blocking ability and talked about how underrated a blocker Kyle Pitts is as a blocker, and I think that's referring not only to Kyle Pitts' underrated ability as an inline blocker, at least as Zach Robinson perceives it, but also that impactful blocking ability that he can provide as a quote-unquote slot receiver. And so those are, to me, kind of the matchups that I'm particularly focused on. There are plenty others in this game that we may unpack as the rest of the week goes on, but those are at least the ones that are most intriguing to me. Basically, if the Falcons can win their one-on-ones up front, especially on the left side of their offensive line, and prevent, whatever combination of Steelers pass rushers from taking over the game, that should do wonders for their ability to win on Sunday. If they can get Drake London going, generate some explosive plays, attacking the middle of that Steelers defense, given the plenty of questions they have at linebacker and slot corner, that will help the Falcons win on Sunday. And then if they can take advantage of the unique mismatch problems that Kyle Pitts creates as a unicorn, I think that will also help them win this game. So, when we look at another intriguing matchup that I'm sure we'll probably get into as the week unfolds, is the Falcons' own defensive front against a questionable Steelers offensive line. I'm expecting the Falcons to, we'll see if they can dominate that matchup, but I'm expecting them to be able to control that line of scrimmage, assuming that the Falcons going to win. I like Matthew Bergeron against either one of the Steelers' offensive tackles with a backup left guard due to the injury to Isaac Suamalo. Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata will have an opportunity to feast in this game against whoever that starter is, presumably Spencer Anderson. And then, of course, you have Eddie Goldman, the incomparable Eddie Goldman, playing nose tackle, going up against a rookie center. So that is also something to keep an eye on. But we'll see what's what with those matchups as the week unfolds. We'll have plenty more opportunities talking about this week one game. Tomorrow, we'll be joined by Tanitra Batiste of Locked On Sports Atlanta. She will be making her triumphant official Locked On Falcons debut here on the podcast to talk about her favorite football team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, as well as the favorite team that she covers when it comes to football, the Atlanta Falcons. So she has a interesting and unique perspective on this week one matchup. So we'll pick Tanitra's brain on tomorrow's episode. We'll also have that official stat and win-loss projection episode at some point. It could be tomorrow. It could be the day after. We'll, of course, have a crossover Thursday coming from you, and we'll, of course, be joined by Jarvis Davis as well as the week unfolds. So a lot of great content coming your way for this upcoming Falcons season, as well as this upcoming week one matchup. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. All you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, make Locked On NFL, the new version of Locked On NFL, your second listen. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta as well. Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Hawks. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every